In the dimly lit chambers of Florence, as the year 1513 drew to a close, Niccolò Machiavelli found himself stripped of power, exiled from the political arena that had been his life's passion. The Medici family had returned to rule, and, with their ascension came his downfall. Yet in this period of forced solitude, removed from the machinations of statecraft, Machiavelli would craft his most enduring contribution to human understanding, a philosophy that would echo through the centuries, teaching generations how to build iron discipline and achieve true sovereignty over their lives. The evening mist rolled across the Tuscan hills as Machiavelli sat at his wooden desk, quill in hand, reflecting on the brutal realities he had witnessed during his years as a diplomatic secretary. He had seen princes rise and fall, republics crumble under the weight of their own idealism, and individuals crushed by forces they refused to acknowledge or understand. Through these observations, he began to formulate a revolutionary approach to life itself, one that demanded unflinching honesty about human nature and the world's inherent unpredictability. The foundation of Machiavellian discipline rests upon a fundamental premise that most find uncomfortable: the world is not as we wish it to be, but as it actually is. This recognition becomes the cornerstone upon which all meaningful self-governance must be built. Too many individuals, Machiavelli observed, construct their lives upon pleasant fantasies about human goodness, the reliability of fortune, and the notion that virtue alone guarantees success. These comfortable delusions, while psychologically soothing, inevitably lead to devastation when reality intrudes with its harsh demands. True discipline begins with what Machiavelli called the cultivation of virtue, not virtue in the traditional moral sense, but rather the ability to act decisively and effectively regardless of circumstances. This concept represents a fundamental departure from conventional wisdom about character development. Where traditional morality suggests that goodness flows from adherence to universal principles, Machiavellian virtue demands adaptability, pragmatism, and, above all, results. The sovereign individual must learn to navigate between the extremes of the fox and the lion, two archetypes that Machiavelli identified as essential to effective leadership and, by extension, successful living. The fox represents cunning, the ability to recognize traps, to think several moves ahead, and to understand the hidden motivations that drive human behavior. The lion embodies strength, courage, and the willingness to use force when circumstances demand it. Most people gravitate toward one archetype or the other, becoming either perpetually scheming but ineffective, or powerfully direct but easily deceived. The disciplined individual learns to embody both aspects as situations require. Consider the businessman who spent years building his company through honest dealing and fair practices, only to watch competitors who cut corners and manipulated regulations surge ahead. The traditional response might be to maintain moral purity and hope that justice eventually prevails. The Machiavellian approach recognizes that while personal ethics matter, they must be balanced with effectiveness. This might mean learning to play by the actual rules of the game rather than the stated ones, understanding that sometimes protecting one's long-term integrity requires tactical compromises in the short term. The development of iron discipline requires confronting three fundamental human tendencies that Machiavelli identified as sources of weakness: the desire for approval, the fear of uncertainty, and the illusion of control. Each of these represents a different form of self-imposed slavery that prevents individuals from achieving genuine sovereignty over their lives. The hunger for approval transforms individuals into reactive beings, constantly adjusting their behavior based on others' expectations rather than pursuing their own authentic interests. Machiavelli observed that rulers who governed primarily to maintain popularity invariably found themselves unable to make difficult but necessary decisions. The same principle applies to personal life. The individual who structures their choices around gaining approval from family, peers, or society will find themselves living someone else's vision rather than their own. Breaking free from approval-seeking requires developing what might be called strategic indifference, the ability to act based on one's own judgment while remaining unmoved by praise or criticism from others. This doesn't mean becoming callous or dismissive of others' feelings, but rather maintaining an internal locus of evaluation. The sovereign individual learns to seek counsel from wise advisors while reserving final judgment for themselves. The fear of uncertainty represents perhaps the most paralyzing force in human psychology. People prefer known problems to unknown solutions, familiar misery to unfamiliar possibility. This tendency leads to a kind of voluntary imprisonment where individuals remain trapped in unsatisfying circumstances simply because they cannot tolerate the anxiety that comes with change. Machiavelli understood that fortune, the unpredictable forces of chance and circumstance, plays a significant role in human affairs, but he insisted that individuals could learn to work with uncertainty rather than being paralyzed by it. The disciplined approach to uncertainty involves developing multiple contingency plans while remaining psychologically flexible enough to adapt when circumstances shift unexpectedly. Rather than trying to predict the future with certainty, the sovereign individual focuses on building resilience and adaptability. This might mean maintaining multiple income streams rather than relying on a single employer, developing diverse skills rather than specializing narrowly, or cultivating relationships across different social and professional circles. The illusion of control manifests in the belief that good intentions and hard work alone determine outcomes. While effort and planning certainly matter, Machiavelli recognized that external forces beyond individual control often prove decisive. The disciplined individual learns to focus energy on factors within their influence while accepting the reality of forces beyond their reach. This paradoxical combination of maximum effort with emotional detachment from outcomes represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of Machiavellian philosophy. Understanding the role of fortune in human affairs becomes crucial for developing authentic sovereignty. Machiavelli famously compared fortune to a violent river that can be channeled and controlled through proper preparation, but never completely tamed. During calm periods, the wise individual builds dikes and channels to direct the flow when storms inevitably arrive. This metaphor applies broadly to personal development. During stable times, one should build skills, resources, and relationships that will prove valuable during turbulent periods. The concept of preparedness extends beyond material resources to include psychological and emotional readiness for adversity. The sovereign individual cultivates what might be termed philosophical armor, a mindset that can absorb setbacks without being crushed by them. This involves developing a mature understanding of loss, failure, and disappointment as natural aspects of ambitious living rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. Machiavelli's observations about human nature provide essential insights for anyone seeking to build discipline and achieve sovereignty. He noted that people are generally driven by self-interest, prone to self-deception, and likely to act based on emotion rather than logic. Rather than deploring these tendencies, the wise individual learns to work with them effectively. This means understanding that trust must be earned and verified rather than given blindly, that people's stated motivations often differ from their actual ones, and that emotional appeals frequently prove more persuasive than rational arguments. These insights about human nature apply as much to self-understanding as to dealing with others. The disciplined individual learns to recognize their own patterns of self-deception, emotional reactivity, and inconsistent motivation. Rather than pretending to be above these human tendencies, they develop systems and structures that work with their actual psychology rather than their idealized self-image. For instance, someone seeking to improve their physical fitness might rely on willpower and good intentions, only to abandon their exercise routine when motivation wanes. The Machiavellian approach would recognize that motivation is inherently unreliable and, instead, focus on creating environmental structures that make the desired behavior more likely. This might involve hiring a personal trainer to create external accountability, joining a gym close to one's workplace to reduce friction, or finding an exercise partner whose presence makes skipping workouts socially uncomfortable. The cultivation of strategic thinking represents another crucial component of Machiavellian discipline. Most people operate tactically, responding to immediate pressures and opportunities without considering long-term implications. The sovereign individual learns to think in terms of systems and patterns rather than isolated events. Every decision is evaluated not only for its immediate consequences but for its effects on future options and opportunities. This strategic mindset requires developing what military theorists call situational awareness, the ability to understand one's current position within larger contexts and trends. The businessperson who recognizes shifting industry dynamics before competitors do can position themselves advantageously. The individual who understands changing social patterns can adapt their career path accordingly. The key lies in developing the habit of regularly stepping back from immediate concerns to assess broader patterns and trajectories. Strategic thinking also involves understanding the concept of leverage, how small actions in the right place can produce disproportionately large results. Machiavelli observed that successful rulers often achieved their goals through carefully chosen interventions at critical moments rather than through constant effort across all fronts. The same principle applies to personal development, identifying the few key areas where focused effort will produce the greatest overall improvement in one's life. The relationship between power and responsibility forms another cornerstone of Machiavellian philosophy that applies directly to personal sovereignty. Many people desire the benefits of power, freedom, influence, resources, without accepting the accompanying responsibilities and burdens. True sovereignty requires embracing both aspects. The individual who seeks only the privileges of independence while avoiding its obligations will find themselves neither truly free nor genuinely powerful. This principle manifests in countless ways throughout daily life. The entrepreneur who wants the profits of business ownership but resents the stress and uncertainty of being responsible for others' livelihoods. The individual who desires the respect that comes with expertise but avoids the years of disciplined study required to develop genuine competence. The person who wants meaningful relationships but refuses to accept the vulnerability and compromise that intimacy demands. Machiavellian discipline requires confronting these contradictions honestly and making conscious choices about which trade-offs one is willing to accept. There are no perfect solutions, only different combinations of benefits and costs. The sovereign individual learns to choose their burdens deliberately rather than having them imposed by circumstances or default. The practice of emotional regulation represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of developing iron discipline. Machiavelli understood that emotions, while natural and often valuable sources of information, can become sources of weakness when they drive decision-making without rational oversight. The leader who acts from anger makes different choices than one who uses anger as information while maintaining strategic clarity. The individual who operates from fear sees different possibilities than one who acknowledges fear while continuing to pursue their goals. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Rather, it involves developing the ability to experience emotions fully while maintaining the capacity for independent judgment. The disciplined individual learns to create space between feeling and action, using that space to evaluate whether emotional impulses align with strategic interests. Developing emotional regulation requires consistent practice in small situations to build the capacity needed for larger challenges. The person who learns to pause before responding to minor irritations develops the psychological muscle memory needed to maintain composure during major crises. The individual who practices acknowledging disappointment without becoming paralyzed by it builds resilience for more significant setbacks. The concept of timing emerges as another crucial element in Machiavellian philosophy. Many well-intentioned efforts fail not because of poor planning or insufficient resources, but because of poor timing. The same action that succeeds brilliantly in one context may fail completely in another, not due to any inherent flaw but because the conditions weren't aligned properly. Learning to read timing involves developing sensitivity to subtle environmental cues and understanding how different factors interact to create windows of opportunity. Sometimes this means moving quickly to capitalize on favorable conditions. Other times it means having the patience to wait for circumstances to improve. The sovereign individual learns to distinguish between opportunities that should be seized immediately and those that require careful preparation and strategic patience. This sensitivity to timing extends to personal development as well. Attempting to make too many changes simultaneously often leads to failure, while making changes in the right sequence can create momentum that makes each subsequent change easier. The individual seeking to transform their life learns to identify which changes will create the foundation for others and which require existing systems to be in place first. The role of reputation and perception represents another sophisticated aspect of Machiavellian thinking that applies directly to personal sovereignty. While the sovereign individual shouldn't be driven by others' approval, they must understand how their actions and choices create impressions that either support or undermine their goals. This involves learning to manage the gap between public persona and private reality in ways that serve long-term interests. This is not about deception or manipulation, but rather about understanding that people form judgments based on limited information and that these judgments have real consequences. The professional who dresses appropriately for their industry isn't being dishonest about their capabilities, but rather communicating their understanding of professional norms. The individual who chooses their words carefully in public settings isn't being false to themselves, but rather recognizing that different contexts require different communication styles. Managing reputation requires developing the ability to see oneself from others' perspectives while maintaining internal integrity. This involves understanding which aspects of one's personality and behavior should be emphasized in different contexts and which are better kept private. The key lies in ensuring that public presentation aligns with authentic values rather than contradicting them. The cultivation of useful alliances and relationships forms another essential component of Machiavellian sovereignty. While independence is valuable, complete isolation is weakness rather than strength. The truly sovereign individual understands that meaningful independence requires strategic interdependence, relationships based on mutual benefit and genuine value exchange rather than neediness or manipulation. Building effective relationships requires developing the ability to assess others' genuine interests and capabilities rather than being swayed by their stated intentions or surface presentations. This involves learning to evaluate people based on their actions over time rather than their words or initial impressions. The wise individual seeks relationships with competent, trustworthy people while maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations. This approach to relationships extends to professional networks, family dynamics, and intimate partnerships. In each context, the principles remain similar: understand what others actually want and need, communicate clearly about your own interests and boundaries, and structure interactions to create genuine mutual benefit rather than one-sided advantage. The development of multiple competencies represents another key aspect of building personal sovereignty. Machiavelli observed that effective rulers needed to understand warfare, diplomacy, economics, and human psychology rather than specializing narrowly in one area. The same principle applies to individual development. While deep expertise in one area provides value, overdependence on any single skill or knowledge base creates vulnerability. The sovereign individual cultivates what might be called Renaissance competence, developing useful abilities across multiple domains rather than betting everything on a single specialty. This might include financial literacy, communication skills, basic legal knowledge, health and fitness, creative abilities, and practical problem-solving skills. The goal isn't to become an expert in everything, but rather to develop enough competence in crucial areas to avoid complete dependence on others. This diversified approach to skill development also provides psychological benefits. The individual who derives identity and self-worth from multiple sources proves more resilient when one area encounters difficulties. The professional whose entire identity revolves around their job faces an existential crisis if that job disappears, while someone with diverse interests and capabilities can adapt more readily to changing circumstances. The practice of continuous learning and adaptation emerges as fundamental to maintaining sovereignty in a changing world. Machiavelli lived during a period of rapid political and social transformation, and he understood that strategies and approaches that worked in one era might prove completely inadequate in another. The disciplined individual develops habits of observation, analysis, and adjustment that allow them to evolve with changing circumstances. This involves cultivating intellectual humility, the recognition that one's current understanding is necessarily incomplete and that new information might require changing established beliefs or approaches. Rather than clinging rigidly to familiar methods, the sovereign individual remains curious about alternative approaches and willing to experiment with new strategies when circumstances warrant. Continuous adaptation also requires developing comfort with the learning process itself, including the temporary incompetence and confusion that accompany skill acquisition. Many people avoid learning new things because they dislike the feeling of being a beginner, but the sovereign individual learns to embrace beginner's mind as a necessary component of growth and adaptation. The integration of planning and improvisation represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of Machiavellian discipline. While strategic thinking and long-term planning provide important advantages, rigid adherence to predetermined plans can become a source of weakness when circumstances change unexpectedly. The disciplined individual learns to plan thoroughly while remaining flexible enough to adapt when reality diverges from expectations. This balance requires developing what jazz musicians call the ability to improvise within structure, having a solid foundation of knowledge and skills that allows for creative adaptation when unexpected situations arise. The well-prepared individual can respond effectively to surprises because they have internalized principles and patterns that guide decision-making even in novel circumstances. The practice of scenario planning helps develop this balance by encouraging consideration of multiple possible futures and preparation for various contingencies. Rather than betting everything on a single expected outcome, the sovereign individual prepares for several possibilities while remaining alert to developments that might require adjusting plans or strategies. The development of internal motivation and self-direction forms perhaps the most fundamental aspect of achieving genuine sovereignty. External motivators, rewards, punishments, social pressure, can provide temporary energy for specific tasks, but they cannot sustain the long-term effort required for meaningful accomplishment. The disciplined individual learns to tap into deeper sources of motivation that don't depend on external validation or immediate gratification. This involves developing a clear understanding of one's authentic values and priorities rather than unconsciously adopting goals imposed by family, society, or circumstance. The process of clarifying values requires honest self-examination and often involves recognizing conflicts between stated beliefs and actual behavior patterns. Many people claim to value health while consistently making choices that undermine their physical well-being, or profess commitment to learning while avoiding challenging material that would expand their capabilities. Authentic self-direction also requires accepting responsibility for one's choices and their consequences rather than blaming external circumstances for unsatisfactory outcomes. This doesn't mean ignoring the real impact of systemic factors or unfair treatment, but rather focusing energy on aspects of life that can be influenced through personal action rather than becoming paralyzed by factors beyond individual control. The cultivation of patience and persistence represents another crucial element in building iron discipline. Most worthwhile accomplishments require sustained effort over extended periods, often without immediate evidence of progress. The modern world's emphasis on instant gratification and rapid results can undermine the psychological capacity needed for long-term projects that produce the most meaningful achievements. Developing genuine patience involves distinguishing between productive persistence and stubborn attachment to failing approaches. The disciplined individual learns to maintain commitment to important goals while remaining flexible about methods and timelines. This might mean continuing to work toward a career change while adjusting strategies based on market feedback, or maintaining commitment to physical fitness while modifying exercise routines to accommodate changing circumstances. The practice of delayed gratification extends beyond avoiding immediate temptations to include making investments that pay off over time rather than seeking short-term gains. This might involve choosing educational opportunities that enhance long-term capabilities rather than immediate income, building relationships based on genuine connection rather than immediate utility, or developing skills that compound over time rather than provide only immediate benefits. The integration of solitude and social engagement represents another sophisticated balance that characterizes mature sovereignty. While independence requires the ability to function effectively alone, complete isolation prevents access to opportunities, resources, and perspectives that enhance individual capability. The sovereign individual learns to engage with others from a position of strength rather than neediness, contributing genuine value while benefiting from what others offer. This balance requires developing comfort with solitude as a source of clarity and renewal rather than something to be avoided or filled with constant activity. Regular periods of reflection and introspection allow for processing experiences, evaluating progress, and making course corrections before minor issues become major problems. The individual who cannot tolerate being alone with their thoughts often lacks the self-awareness necessary for effective self-direction. Simultaneously, the disciplined individual recognizes that meaningful accomplishment often requires collaboration and that isolation can become a form of self-imposed limitation. Learning to work effectively with others while maintaining personal integrity and independence represents one of the most challenging aspects of mature development. The understanding of risk and uncertainty forms a final crucial component of Machiavellian philosophy applied to personal development. While security and predictability have obvious appeal, they often come at the cost of opportunity and growth. The sovereign individual learns to evaluate risks intelligently rather than avoiding them entirely or embracing them recklessly. This involves developing the ability to distinguish between different types of risks and their potential consequences. Some risks, if they materialize, produce minor inconveniences that can be easily managed. Others might create major setbacks but still leave fundamental capabilities intact. A few risks, however, might produce catastrophic consequences that destroy years of progress or permanently limit future options. The disciplined approach to risk involves accepting smaller uncertainties and potential setbacks in order to avoid larger ones, while remaining alert to opportunities that justify taking calculated chances on potentially transformative outcomes. This might mean maintaining financial reserves to handle unexpected expenses while still making investments that could produce significant returns, or developing backup career options while still pursuing ambitious primary goals. As the candle burned low in Machiavelli's study that winter evening in 1513, he could not have imagined how his insights into political power would eventually transform personal development philosophy. Yet the principles he articulated, clear-eyed assessment of reality, strategic thinking, emotional regulation, continuous adaptation, and the integration of strength with flexibility, provide a timeless framework for building iron discipline and achieving genuine sovereignty over one's life. The path he outlined is not easy or comfortable, requiring individuals to abandon pleasant illusions in favor of sometimes harsh truths about human nature and the world's inherent unpredictability. It demands accepting responsibility for outcomes while acknowledging the limits of personal control, building strength while remaining adaptable, and pursuing independence while understanding the value of strategic relationships. Yet for those willing to embrace its challenges, Machiavellian philosophy offers something invaluable, a proven approach to building genuine capability and resilience in an uncertain world. The individual who develops these capacities finds themselves able to navigate whatever circumstances arise, not because they can control external events, but because they have cultivated the internal resources necessary to respond effectively to whatever challenges and opportunities emerge. The sovereign life is not one free from difficulty or setback, but rather one in which difficulties become opportunities for demonstrating and developing capability rather than sources of victimization or paralysis. It is a life lived from the inside out, driven by authentic values and informed judgment rather than external pressures or unconscious reactions to circumstances. In our contemporary world of rapid change and increasing complexity, these insights prove more relevant than ever. The individual who develops Machiavellian discipline finds themselves equipped not only to survive uncertainty but to thrive within it, turning unpredictability from a source of anxiety into a context for exercising creativity and demonstrating resilience. The iron discipline that Machiavelli described is not rigid or brittle, but rather resembles the flexibility of a master swordsman responsive to changing conditions while maintaining fundamental integrity and purpose. It is this combination of strength and adaptability, preparation and improvisation, independence and strategic engagement that characterizes the truly sovereign life. Those who undertake this path of development often find that the journey itself becomes as valuable as the destination. The process of building genuine capability and authentic self-direction produces a sense of confidence and competence that external achievements alone cannot provide. The sovereign individual discovers that freedom is not the absence of constraints, but rather the ability to choose one's constraints consciously and to work effectively within whatever limitations exist. The philosophy that emerged from that small room in Florence over 5 centuries ago continues to offer profound insights for anyone seeking to build discipline and achieve genuine sovereignty in their own life. It requires courage to see clearly, wisdom to act effectively, and patience to develop capabilities over time. Yet for those willing to embrace its demands, it provides a path toward authentic freedom and meaningful accomplishment that remains as relevant today as it was when first conceived in the crucible of Renaissance political upheaval. The sovereign life awaits those bold enough to pursue it, disciplined enough to develop it, and wise enough to sustain it through whatever changes and challenges the future may bring. In embracing Machiavelli's insights and adapting them to contemporary circumstances, individuals can build the iron discipline necessary not merely to survive in an uncertain world, but to shape it according to their deepest values and highest aspirations.